Minister, for a fantastic speech. I invite up the Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hi there, can I be heard and seen? Oh.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Just give me some time. I'm gonna set up my timer. 1 second. Okay. Yeah. So POI is in the chat. I'll probably take closing at 5:30. Sorry, opening. Okay. Anyways, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think that opening government is already losing when their entire premise hinges upon the fact that individuals want to make positive changes to the world. When they give like no structural reasons of like why people are likely going to act selflessly towards themselves and not selfishly. Where opening opposition is going to give you the structural reasons why individuals are more likely to act selfishly rather than selflessly, and why that's going to be much more harmful in their side of the world than our side of the world. The second is that the opening government is simply so very uncomparative. The fact that they never understand that what the pre-existing structures that already exist to combat the kind of like the structural changes and like the push for the changes and inclusivity that they want to push for. We think that there are already pre-existing structures that already exist that can achieve that thing. We don't get any idea of like why that's exclusive to their side of the house and why that we should push for the fact. And thirdly, there is simply no link proven by like how like this change of like widespread radical freedom is going to likely lead to the positive outcomes. We think that radical freedom in and of itself is a rebellion against the current social constructs because people are more likely to act selfishly and hedonistically towards themselves. We think that this is not likely the case. What is opening opposition's frame? We think that there are already pre-existing structures and that have shown to show some flexibility through time to change societal beliefs. We see that in 50 years ago where like black rights are not being like recognized. We think that there's a capacity to change like the ideas of societal constructs. But we think that the caveat on what we think that what's unique on our side of the house is that they're kind of like more weighted and more restricted towards the boundaries of to make sure that people do not act selflessly towards themselves. We think that these barriers and these boundaries are necessary for society to function because it makes sure that all the minorities and all the tragedies of the commons are not being harmed. So what is the characteristic of opening opposition? We think that in society, people are born into society, for example, and like are prescribed like certain moral values and beliefs. For example, some people are born into a religious. Most people ascribe to a social contract theory, and like the question. Why are these like beliefs and value systems so important and imposed upon in society? We think that this is quite intuitive because like firstly like ensuring that there are like some kind of fundamental rules and conduct in society ensures the efficiency of the society and ensures that there is some kind of order and efficiency for the society to function. We think that insofar as these constructs have been taken away, it is likely going to lead to more of the powerful people taking over these kind of people and like it's going to likely lead to much further outcomes, which I'll later prove why is that the case. Why is it then like the widespread belief? And notice that they never really characterize why it is the widespread belief, because like we still have some kind of like changes. We still have the capacity to change on the outside of the house, but like we think that the radical widespread belief to change is going to likely lead to much worse outcomes. Firstly, we think that people inherently act selflessly towards themselves, and they're going to lead to more hedonistic tendencies. Why is that the case? We think that when people act in society, they are the only and the main actors who will judge like the kind of impacts and weigh up the impacts and the outcomes of the decisions that they make for themselves. For example, like when they interact with their family and that stuff, they're likely even if they're like likely going to act in a selfless way and helping their family, it's also going to likely lead to like some kind of selfish inherent desire to like how it's likely going to benefit them. Secondly, we think that individuals are inherently individualistic insofar as they're able to insofar as they're the main actors in themselves, and they're the ultimate ones who decide for themselves. We think that when we remove the kind of societal boundaries that restrict them from leading towards these hedonistic tendencies, that where they only think towards themselves and what benefits them, we think that this is going to be incredibly harmful to the minorities that I'm going to later talk about in the impacts. So what are these hedonistic tendencies look like, and why is that so bad for society? We think that firstly, we think that people are likely going to be think more selfishly. They're going to more likely think about like the kind of benefits, the individual's benefits that benefit themselves. For example, like the majoritarians, where they want to like push for like when they want to push for like what benefits them. For example, like business owners, like for example, like male conservative owner, people like that. We think that more of these kind of majority people are likely going to act selfishly for themselves and be less likely to consider the alternative values for others. What is the impact of this? We think that this is actually going to be very harmful towards minorities, because we think that ultimately when majorities become more selfish towards themselves and only think for themselves, minorities will simply lose out in the battle because there's simply less of them. And we think that the minority voices are going to likely be trumped out by the majority voices, because we think that when we have a widespread change in terms of like the radical belief, this is going to lead to much more harmful outcomes. This is likely going to be the effect, because when everyone is thinking for themselves, most people will likely lead to a better, worse outcomes for themselves. The second impact is that it is actually going to be harmful to many of the impacts that will likely cause. We think that secondly, it's going to harm like many of these social movements who rely on allyship and rely on those many industries, majoritarian industries that support them. We think that when insofar as they lose this kind of allyship, and insofar as they're not able to campaign for them, we think that this is much likely going to lead to more of the kind of like majoritarian view. More likely it's going to be hurtful and harmful towards the minority views. But before that, I want to take a POI from CG if they have one.
Yes, I would like to ask, how is it actually possible for some people to be like, very selfish, but in the same time you're talking about mentally weak minorities that will be a victim of this belief?
I don't know what they're trying to get for the system. We think that when society puts restrictions and boundaries towards how majorities think, we think that this is likely going to protect minorities' rights and protects the views of the things. I'm not sure what CG is claiming for. What is the likely comparative that OG never deals with? We think that the likely comparative is that when we ascribe certain values that are set in stone, that make sure that society functions as a result. This controls the people from acting more towards and tending towards their hedonistic tendencies. This restricts majority people to act more selfishly and for themselves. And I think that this is the reason why we have like social contract theory. This is the reason why we have religion as a result, because they indoctrinate some good morals that are generally widely accepted by society, that is widely accepted by the general public, to protect all of the people that are involved. We think that this is a much better social order. We think that this is going to protect minorities in a much way. We think that OG never deals with the harms of their case. For all of those reasons, vote OO.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for a fantastic speech. Invite up the Deputy Leader of Opposition to close out the front half of this debate. Here's here.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are both audible and visible.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. If we buy OG's case, then in that sense, humanity would never have changed at all from the past 300 years now, because no one has had a widespread belief in radical freedom. But clearly that isn't the case, right? Radical freedom is not the only thing. We need to be able to understand that sometimes we are wrong and sometimes we therefore need to change, right? So I think I just want to break this premise and prove why. So I think one of the key ideas that they bring up in their speech is the idea that, well, if not for radical freedom, people won't change. People therefore won't be less racist, less sexist, less homophobic, right? But I don't think radical freedom is necessarily the one and only thing we need to stimulate change, right? Like, for instance, perhaps 200 years ago, white people thought it was acceptable to enslave Black people because Black people were biologically different. Science has told them that that is not the case. Now we therefore do not, now out of many reasons, therefore, we do not think it is acceptable to enslave certain groups of minorities, right? This is precisely the point. Like, people can change their minds based on things like, say, misinformation, right? Because a lot of misguided beliefs is, say, based on misinformation, a lot of other characteristics, like, say, negative individual experiences that people have had. Insofar as those things change, we don't necessarily need radical freedom in order for people to ever be able to change their attitudes, mindsets, and beliefs. If that was the case, we would have never had any change whatsoever from the start of civilization until now. I think the second thing OG brings up that is problematic is that they say is that the other premise of their case is that people want to make positive changes in their life, right, and other people's lives. But I want us to consider this intuitively, right? When we say freedom, we usually mean freedom from, like, say, established rules, established structure. I think, as my LO rightly points out, these are things like religion, these are things like laws, these are things like the moral code that society tells you, things you can or cannot do, right? So freedom necessarily suggests freedom from these beliefs. Like, we'll take them at their best, even things like, say, patriarchal beliefs, for instance, right? So presumably, I think for this debate to function, it means radical freedom from things that society tells you. Now, what society tells you that you are not supposed to be a good person, it is completely unclear to me, right? Like, even if we want to engage with all the things they're talking about, like say, people wanting to reform from drug addiction, like, say, anger management issues, right? All of those things, we do not need people to believe in radical freedom to do that, right? So, for instance, religion tells you that you ought to be able to give to charity. You don't need radical freedom to tell you that you can be a good person. You do not need, like, say, radical freedom to believe that you can volunteer and be a better person because society is going to already tell you to go volunteer at that soup kitchen on Thanksgiving, right? You don't need radical freedom to believe that, to want to, like, say, not beat up someone because of your anger issues. I think the threat of being sued for battery is sufficient enough, right? So even if we take them on their best, even if people don't, like, say, believe they can change, we think people still have other structural incentives to not just act on every single desire because of real life repercussions that follow from it, right? So I think fundamentally, when we talk about the freedom to do something, people are more likely to pursue things out of self-interest. I think my LO says this, but it was completely ignored, so I'm going to reiterate why. I'm going to be charitable here. We're not saying people are all fundamentally selfish, horrible individuals just for the sake of it. We think people are naturally going to be more self-interested because that is the metric on which it is that people are best able to make their own decisions. Like, I know how I will feel about giving $50 away to charity, but I do not necessarily know where that $50 will go and how it will then therefore subsequently impact some other people in some way, right? The reason why individuals are most likely to be individualistic in the absence of, say, like, societal norms and structures to tell you to do otherwise is because the most immediate thing we feel is the impact on ourselves. People are not necessarily even bad per se, we'll take them at their best, but we think that it's just that on that metric, people are more likely to be self-interested. If we think about these types of structures that in society that tells us to ascribe to certain beliefs, to ascribe to certain values, it's usually for the common good, right? Like, this is an incentive that is pushed in society. Like, no society is going to push, like, say, pure individualism because we think that fundamentally leads to bad outcomes, right? That is why, for instance, society often demands that you pay some level of taxes in order for it to be redistributed to people. That's why religion, for instance, tells you to be, like, say, generally it tells you to do things like be more forgiving, be more charitable, like, you know, don't hurt other people. It's because in the absence of this, societal structures will collapse. So we think the more realistic characterization of this debate is in a sense that when you have radical freedom, people are more likely to rebel against established norms, more likely to pursue individualistic beliefs. And we think that is definitely more likely to be a bad thing because when people pursue, like, say, their own tendencies, it's likely to be what benefits them. Never heard of people therefore needing radical freedom to believe that they can be better because literally all of society tells you to be better. So on that clash alone, I think OG is already out, right? So now let's talk about the more important clash in the debate, right? So what happens when everyone believes in radical freedom? Because OG cannot pick and choose who they want to have radical freedom. They cannot say the oppressed women deserve radical freedom, the men oppressing them don't get radical freedom, right? And that's essentially the case that they're running. I think, as my Elo rightly points out, when everyone believes in radical freedom, it often benefits the majority because they become entrenched in their power. Just because they now have the ability to change their attitudes, values, and beliefs doesn't necessarily mean that they will do so in the absence of other things like, say, social movements, right? So we think all of those are better ways in which you can get people to change. And we think in the sense that when everyone has, say, radical freedom, their will is more likely to overpower that of, say, the oppressed minorities, right? Who want to rebel against this because they're still going to be subdued, even if they do not want to be subdued anyways. We think radical freedom is essentially horrible in the fact that it leads to, like, say, very counterproductive forms of rebellion, right? Like, so for instance, okay, I think we can all agree unanimously that, say, exceptionally patriarchal societies are a bad thing. We want those women to be liberated. We want them to believe that they can change. We think feminism movements do that just fine. We do not think radical freedom in the sense like radical, like sudden radical change is necessarily a good thing per se, right? Because no matter, even if these groups are able to change at least, right? Now, let's say that these women now believe that they can opt out of a patriarchal society. In status quo, there are still structural barriers holding them back in place, right? Like, yes, you can believe that you can go out of it, but it doesn't change the fact that your family might say still stone you per se, right? Or it doesn't change the fact that there are still laws that prevent you from going to school. We think radical freedom in that sense is not necessarily the way in which we want to enact social change. We think it often does more harm than good. We think we'd rather societal-wide change, like i.e. people can change their beliefs if it is based on misinformation, right? That's why in the past centuries, women have gone from, say, not being able to vote to being able to vote, not being able to go to school to being able to go to any type of school they want, right? We think that the fact that society has progressed over the past couple hundred years or so is enough proof that OG's case is absolutely false. And let's talk about why, even if we want change, right? Why radical freedom is not the way to go. And this preempts against any possible extensions coming up from the closing halves, right? We prefer motivators like guilt, etc., that get people to change, right? That people will feel bad about themselves and therefore not do something, or like, say, criminalization of certain acts that people therefore won't engage in them, right? We think all of those things are better motivators because insofar as radical freedom, the idea you can arbitrarily alter your beliefs, attitudes, and morals is a thing, people can essentially go back to their original state of mind as and when it pleases them, right? Like, they have the radical freedom to suddenly believe that, say, certain groups of minorities are not bad, but in the sense that one of them wrongs them, like, say, a minority robbed a shop near where they live, then they're also perfectly free by virtue of radical freedom to go back to the belief that said minorities are bad. We think radical freedom does not provide a permanent form of change, we'd much rather other forms. Proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the DLO for a fantastic speech. Thank everyone on front half for an excellent front half of the debate. I want to remind all the speakers, please take POIs during your speeches. This is something that myself and my panelists are counting and keeping track of. If you don't take POIs, by the power vested in us by the WUET or World's University Debating Championships Judging Manual, we have the power to punish you. So please take POIs. I'd like to invite up the member of government here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep.
All right, just to get off my timer, and I will start. All right, I'm going to start. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Let's go with a little bit of rebuttal. Please understand that small opinions won't overpower or oppress other big opinions. Why? The other side of the house doesn't give us any reasons. I will. Please understand, when everyone is open-minded, only the best values will stay. So that means small super radical opinions wouldn't actually be there. But even if I'm going on the best world, I'm going to be charitable. Only the radical values will actually go down. Why? Because when think about this, when you have a person who is extremely radical, he probably doesn't have many structural reasons about why his side wins. But from the other side, which is a little bit more open-minded and thus has more arguments for this, you're pretty sure the other guy, if you have this radical freedom, the other guy will say, yes, fair enough, you're right, I'm going to agree with this, and I'm going to actually copy your opinion. So these and this is our main argument, that these radical opinions will go down. Let's talk about this. Why people are likely to actually create values that are bad for them, right? Firstly, let's talk about the positive side. You see major progress, you get compliments, you make a difference in their life, and you want to actually get even better. Let's give an example. Like you're going to the gym, you're starting to get even fitter, you're getting more confidence, or you're actually starting to make more money. People say, oh my god, good job, you did actually great. Second thing, you have social media. You always see these things that are like in the perfect state, super non-genuine. So think about this. It's even more when you actually start to do something that you really like, because you're going to see many other fitness pages. You're going to see even better bodies, right? All right, let's talk about and also these things are also universally liked. People want to be rich, people want to be fit, people want to be better, people want their political view to be expanded. Okay, let's talk about bad values. Let's characterize them. Because no one else did. This radicalization of actually good things, right? Because this fully focused on appearance, finance, wants to do things and actually grind, right? Wants to take steroids or even starve themselves just to look even better, and it's super hyper focusing on these things. Bottom line, people are very likely to become radicalized and create actually bad values. And also maybe radicalization in politics. Okay, let's talk about why are bad values super bad. Firstly, you have physical health being threatened. Secondly, you have financial stability being threatened. Thirdly, you lose meaning of connections. You have this mental burden on yourself that you want to become the best in this, because you have this pride that you already started, that no one else in your life, in your group or your past friends actually did this. So this becomes your big personality. Bottom line, your quality of life will change for the worse. Let's talk about why you won't actually change. Firstly, because of the positive start. Because think about this, nobody else is doing this. So you literally have this pride in you. Your family and your past friends probably don't also do these things. You become like the center of attention for this one thing. So it becomes even better to actually get this out. Okay. Secondly, it's super hard to actually change. You have this one thing that that defines you as a person, that you're good at, that you're good with. So you have this pride that you actually that you're the best with, and someone else tell you, oh, I think you shouldn't do this. It becomes extremely antagonizing, extremely bad, and you become ignorant to all the other arguments, because you think this is my thing, I'm going to do this. Nobody else doesn't know as much as I do, so I must have the right opinion. All right, let's talk. And also your new friends also believe in this. Why? Because you're probably going to have another friend group that you're talking to people who have also the narrow-minded mindset, and that you aren't doing something unhealthy with your life. And bottom line is, you literally won't change. All right, let's talk about how we change it. People need to change their people actually in status quo. People need to change their values. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about like people having radicalized political view, people having body dysmorphia, people having like the hustle culture and max productivity thing, people not being in a toxic relationship. All these things, they as we explained already, need to actually change. All right, and think about this. Why would our actually belief be successful? Because think about where it comes from. The people you love will tell you about it, right? So now this will have even more value than the status quo, because you're going to actually even more listen to them and think of, okay, the arguments are actually pretty good. This actually affects my mental health or even my physical health. I probably shouldn't do this. You also have social media platforms who actually also spread info about these things. Why? Because think about this analogy, like the belief that you shouldn't actually give up on these things that you love, because you grew up with this, you see other people you admire executing it, and think about this. This will actually also happen on our side of the house. The same with this new belief that this has a long-term effect on them. All right, let's talk about the impacts of this. This is extremely important. All right. Firstly, you have also any questions? Any questions?
Yes,
Yo.
point opening. Your arguments only apply with regards to things like committing crime that will negatively affect your quality of life. But being self-interested can mean like littering, not doing your recycling, like pursuing relationships for material gain. All of these benefit you. So how does that Yeah.
Please understand, every good habit that you actually do, if you do it, if you become radicalized with it, it will become unhealthy. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the eco activists who threw tomatoes and Van Gogh painting, who do some crazy stuff, who blow up stuff, who blow up certain industries just to show, all right, we're doing eco stuff. I'm talking about this. This is bad, and everything that you do will actually get radicalized. Please also understand, why are we different? Why are we different than OG? Firstly, they don't give any reasons why these things are bad. Secondly, also this is one of the main things. Our arguments and our extension actually works on both framings, right? I'm talking about, well, think about this. If this is super popular, our stance is still science, our stance still science. And if things aren't popular and people just have these meaningful values that are set in stone, it still also works. Okay, please also understand, let's go into impacts first. You have less time on daily activities that harm themselves. But the positive is that you focus on the good things that they actually didn't have the time for. Now, like put a larger focus on their mental health, treasure their relationships more, focus more on their physical health, look for more diverse relationship or actually hobbies. And please understand, my other speaker will weigh the arguments about why our arguments will actually make the biggest difference in this debate. And also, please vote, what was it? Please vote CG. Yeah.
I'd like to thank the member of government for a fantastic speech. Right up the member of opposition. Here.
Just 1 second to organize my notes and start my timer.
For sure, take your time. You have a minute.
Okay. I'll take POIs in the chat, please. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think opposition is largely a wash in this debate. Like OG says, OO says people are likely to change and be really individualistic. OG says, no, we don't really understand why each other is more likely. But also that is like a very low impact extension. But I'm going to tell you in my extension, I have a few extensions. So I'll tell you first why people can't change their value systems and why pressure and the belief that they can change it is really bad for them. Secondly, I'll be telling you why institutions coerce people. Thirdly, I'll be telling you why this is bad for poor people. Fourthly, I'll talk about how this increases the ability for state propaganda to be spread. A few things I want to frame under stats. The first thing is that this narrative exists in the context of other narratives as well. There are still things like patriarchy and state propaganda which have incentives to propagate their own narratives. Also, some narratives and some beliefs are going to be framed as better because there is the incentive of states in the patriarchy to propagate this. I think broadly, like government also agrees with this. This also means like government can't just say people are able to choose whatever they want to believe on their side of the house, because there are active pressures into believing some narratives over other narratives, because some beliefs are portrayed as being better, like, being really nationalist in some countries, caring about your state law. Secondly, there is no inherent secondly, it is a belief that there is no inherent thing you care about. I think on our side of the house, you believe that you have some inherent desires. The way you interpret it is you have like you should have more ability to act on those core desires that you have, whereas on their side, you get to choose what you care about. So firstly, I'm going to be proving on why you actually can't change your fundamental desires. OO says like a little bit of this, but I'm going to mechanize it way further and prove why it's literally impossible. First, you have biological urges that you cannot change. Like, for example, if someone is gay, they literally cannot change that. You have things like urges to have friendships because these have been passed on evolutionarily. You have the urge, you have things in your attitude, like you're more introverted sometimes you just find it like harder to focus. And you also probably prioritize things like autonomy. So you do have sort of individual desires as well as to, for example, do you want to have children or not as a woman? Like to what degree do you want rights, etc., etc. Secondly, you still have preferences because you still like some things more than other things. And thirdly, you're likely to compare yourself to others and you still want things like better material conditions, for instance. Why is it bad then? This is my first question. Why is it bad when you have this belief that you change your value systems? Because of this pressure that some value systems are better than others, that, for instance, you should have children because that is beneficial for society, or you should like work harder and you should stop being so introverted all the time. There are two impacts you get. One, you keep trying to change yourself. So you internalize your current beliefs as bad and you believe that you have the ability to actually change them. You become really, really frustrated because uh, every time you're not able to change your beliefs because of all the reasons that I told you, you're likely to blame yourself and think that you're not trying hard enough. But secondly, even if you manage to actually change your beliefs, this is likely just going to be gaslighting yourself. So you believe that you are straight, for instance, or you believe that you really care about material fulfillment, but all you care about is relationships. And this means you're likely to gaslight yourself and still feel a sense of like, even when you reach that really powerful position as like an executive, that you're not really satisfied with your life. This directly engages a lot of serious material. On weighing, this is the most important impact in this debate because one, it affects literally everyone. Secondly, the impacts are certain. So maybe people change, maybe they don't change, but they certainly will feel really pressured by this narrative instead of like on the comparative when you're told that, believing anything is fine because you can like state, because you do have some inherent beliefs as well. Moving on to my second extension on institutions. So OG says this is just like symmetric on both sides. It isn't, because the difference in the two sides is, sure, patriarchy still exists on both sides, but where do social movements have more ability to mobilize support and get power? So why are institutions have likely to have the ability to coerce people? Because they can change people's preferences and they can like coerce women to want to have kids, gay people to be heterosexual. Often because these people are already vulnerable and are told that like they don't really have a say in what their beliefs should be because of the fact that they can fundamentally change their beliefs. This means that one, if they don't change their beliefs and like a woman continues to want to not have children and be firm about it, they are blamed because it is seen as like they still do have the ability to change and they're not, changing their beliefs for the sake of the family. But secondly, even if they do manage to change their beliefs, like conservative women glorifying stay-at-home moms, the issue is that they are extremely oppressed and they are never able to escape the cycle of oppression because they are taught by the patriarchy, as what happens to a lot of women, that they can change their desires and beliefs to like want women, and you indoctrinate this. On the comparative, you get more support for social movements because you allow people to actualize their rights and beliefs as like a minority. But secondly, OG just isn't nuanced. Like, sure, patriarchy still has incentives, but this isn't a blanket structure. You're able to switch the moderates onto your side when moderates are far more able to realize that people have beliefs and people have desires that aren't getting actualized, and you can't just change those desires. Before moving on, POI from opening. Okay, closing.
Please engage with our case. And secondly, why would people actually gaslight themselves if their opinions isn't super radicalized and
so people gaslight themselves because they believe that some beliefs are like more superior than others and they should be believing them. Right, I'll get to the case right now. Okay, just quickly on the extension on why it's worse for poor people, it's because you blame poor people for like wanting leisure time. You tell them like, why can't you change and be more hardworking? Because you don't realize that poor people have internal desires to do things like watch TV or spend time with their family, and they don't necessarily follow Maslow's hierarchy. But fourthly, on state propaganda, states are likely to use it to further their interest and push things like the military. Right, now I'll be responding to CG. What do they bring you from their side, right? Firstly, they tell you this idea that people are likely to starve themselves and people create bad values for themselves. So two responses to this. First, it's unclear how you change on their side of the house either, because presumably you still have a bunch of pressures telling you that, being skinny is like the better thing to be, and therefore you still have those sorts of beliefs. But secondly, on the comparative, if you do have something like body dysmorphia, you have more ability to realize like, what is it that I actually care about? And you're not like as vulnerable to having your beliefs continuously being changed. You have more ability that you have more like that you can more fully actualize what your actual beliefs are. I'll respond to them more later in my whip speech. Proud to Oppose.
I'd like to thank the member of opposition for a fantastic speech. Just going to remind speakers, unless the person giving the POI goes over 15 seconds, please try not to cut them off. Invite up the government whip. You're here. Government whip, hello.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep.
Great.
I like your shirt.
Thank you. CEO have a point there, like not a big one, but they do. And still, I want to make it very, very clear. Yes, this narrative of this motion exists along with others, but I think there is also a very important narrative that is existing from their side of the house. And this is the belief that probably if we are changing in a world which is making you take hard stances since you are a lot younger than you were than you would have been like 50 years whatever. Basically, this means that changing is a very painful process. Even whenever you're doing something that is terrifying for you, that is hurting you on level you're still not ready to comprehend. That is why our side of the house is so unique. We are the only team in this debate that is showing you how we are basically going to change the habits of people that have gone too far. And this is very likely occurrence, right? Because we are living in 21st century, a century in which being extreme is the new modern. A few things on the case of CO. Basically, they are telling us how you feel bad because of the pressure that has put it on you, and you're like going to feel miserable that you're the only one probably not changing. A few things on that. First, I think people are making sort of logical decisions about themselves, about their habits, and how does it look like when I'm being called out for something that I have done. I will make a careful consideration of whether or not this trait is actually harmful, and hence, in consequence, I'm probably going to get a decision whether I'm going to change or not. I do not get structural reasons from their side of the house why this won't happen. But second, I think that there is probably an opposition of wrong values existing from both sides of our houses, and especially from their house. Like, for example, if I don't know, there exists a narrative that you should change for the better, but what does exist? What does it actually mean to get better? If there is an opposition that there is for a particular belief, people are probably going to, gets called out and whatever. But okay, I want to continue basically with the opening call because I think the CO were sort of derivative to their opening. A few things from basically the opening house. They're telling us a lot of things about, individualism and how people can decide from themselves and how this is very important value. A few things on that. First, I think that's a bit too far because notice that often minorities are more considering about their rights. They have fought for them a lot longer, and they still do about some perspectives. So they're very, very careful about how people treat them because it has taken a lot of effort for them to actually take those rights, and their rights are actually still violated in nowadays. So they will be extremely careful if this is going to happen, if they're going to get manipulated. Second, I think that social movements will basically react to that. Like if there are, people trying to convince you, like for example, your boss at your work that you're probably, I don't know, you shouldn't work there because I don't know of a specific reason like race or gender. Probably social movements will look out to this. Probably judicial systems will try to look out for this if they're working, which they're often not. Another thing is that still racial crimes and stuff like that can make you, I don't know, sentenced, for example, will get you bad reputation as a corporation. And I'm not sure if bad big elites have the stimulus to do that when there are some consequences in our world, some consequences like being called out from big social movements, like, I don't know, posting on social media how this big corporation is basically badly treating their workers and etc. And fourthly, I think we can easily win this argument by a few things. First, basically, we can prove that minorities rely on the premise of change. Like changing your desires, changing your values is extremely important for minorities nowadays. This looks like people questioning their gender and basically having the belief that this is okay to happen, and the stress they are going through, all of the bad thoughts they are having will basically be a lot less likely to have a burden on them from our side of the house. But second, I think that more vulnerable groups will get to terms with their feelings from our side of the house. This looks like people with depression who can't comprehend the fact that they are feeling these suicidal thoughts or like whatever bad feelings they have from your side of the house, because from them, for their, basically it doesn't look okay to change your whole perspective of your world and your desires. Further, before I continue, I will take PY from opening.
Sure. Extremism can be symmetric on both sides of the house, but don't you think the widespread radical freedom is going to lead to more radical thought from on your side of the house? And how do you deal with that potential harm?
I don't think so, because these radical forms can be called out, and they probably will. Like, there still exist some institutions, I don't know, social movements that think about the good of the people. Okay, about the whole point of the opening, that how we wouldn't have changed if there wasn't an existing belief about how change can happen. A few things on that. First, notice that women getting rights means a lot of sacrifices and time. It has been a lot of effort for these minority groups to actually make a change, and it still is. So changing as a value in our world will probably make this happen faster. Second, notice this radicalization is actually very massive right now. From our side of the house, I think with existing social media, etc., it actually would be better if people actually question themselves if they are doing the right thing. Surely, I think this actually actively corresponds with our extension, where basically people are taking bad decisions about their well-being. But okay, about the other factors that can regulate, notice that they aren't always effective. Like institutions can have certain biases, like for example being racist. And I don't know. Second, social media doesn't always reach you. And thirdly, if you do bad stuff, you probably won't care about what institutions say, because you will believe in your superiority. And lastly, basically, this is true in both worlds, but especially in their side of the house, when you are raised with a belief that you are always right. But from our side of the house, you are raised and built on as a character with a belief that basically you need to question yourself constantly. And what is the comparison? First, we win because we are basically reaching more people. Right? We are basically talking about problems that every person on the earth has. Likeliness, our case is a lot likelier than every other team in the debate, and surely it's about long term and not doing bad stuff for yourself. And because of these reasons, I appeal you to vote for CG.
I'd like to thank the government whip for a fantastic speech. I invite up the opposition whip to close off this round of debate. Here.
Just 1 minute. Sorry, just 10 seconds. Okay, cool. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I want to make one clarification at the top of this debate, which Gov Bench is fundamentally misunderstood, because the entire government bench operates on an assumption that people are free to change and they can choose whatever their beliefs are. That is why they claim that all of their impacts on like minorities are symmetric or go to that side, because minorities have a ton of power to choose whatever beliefs they want to choose. My extension directly engaged with this, and the fact that we had absolutely no responses undercuts their entire case. A few things I want to do. Firstly, I'll build up my extension. Firstly, I'll rebut CG. Secondly, rebuttal to OG. Thirdly, on my extension, I'll wait off. Right. Firstly, to closing government, what do we hear from them? That people are able to like change their habits and change their fundamental beliefs. Firstly, the thing I said on people actually aren't able to change. Why is this incredibly pernicious then? Because at the point at which people aren't able to change, the beliefs that they adopt are likely going to be beliefs that society pushes, or beliefs that, like, say, their friends push. So if there is an image of like a beautiful person being really skinny, they are also likely to adopt those beliefs. Secondly, this debate is about fundamental changes in your desires and beliefs. So if the impacts of that government wants to talk about are like being nicer exists on either side of the house. This is more about what are the fundamental beliefs and desires do you have? Do you desire personal fulfillment? Do you desire helping others, etc., etc.? Like more secondary beliefs, like not trying to hurt others, are likely to exist on both sides of the house, because being nicer is also good from a very selfish perspective, right? But also, if you're like see it with more of a selfish perspective, in that you stay true to your own individual beliefs and don't try to change your beliefs, you're actually far more likely to achieve this positive change that closing wants to talk about, which means we flip all of their impacts. Because if closing really wants people to change, it is far more realistic for them to change from like being self-interested, but recognizing that helping others is also good for their self-interest. Right then. Moving on to and then lastly, the thing they say on like minorities can just change whatever their beliefs are, and like they have the ability to change, what gender that they think, what gender they are. A clarification to make is that this debate is about changing your fundamental beliefs, not about exploring your fundamental beliefs. So when you realize that you are a different gender than the one that you are assigned to at birth, it is actually on our side that you're far more able to recognize this, rather than in their world where you're forced to sort of change your fundamental belief about what kind of person you are, what gender you are, in order to meet societal norms. Secondly, I wanted about OG. What did they tell you? Firstly, on this idea that that you try hard to change your impulsive behavior. Firstly, there is still the broad norm to be like good to people, and you're told to act on those norms. But like secondly, and more importantly, the vast majority of people don't think of themselves as evil individuals, which means on their side they're unlikely to change either. Right then. But what else do they bring you on this idea of criminals and how you, in the chat, please, on criminals and how you believe they're like inherently bad? I'm going to flip this, because recognize the characterization of why most crimes occur in society. Most crimes are societal, right? So most crimes are economic crimes of necessity, wherein you are pushed by society in order to like commit certain crimes because you do not have enough money to feed your family or pay the medical bills. This means that you actually can't just stop crime by having people change their minds. It is on-site proposition where you're far more likely to push criminals and to try to coerce them in order to change their minds, when in fact they can't. Then on this idea that OG brings to you on like behavior therapy, right? What do they tell you? They tell you that you're unlikely to do things like go to therapy because you don't want to. But like the fundamental thing that therapy does is therapy actually teaches you more about what your beliefs are, rather than tries to fundamentally change your beliefs. That is why a lot of therapy works on asking questions like, how did that make you feel? This means that you're actually more likely to go to therapy at the point at which you want to try to understand more about what your beliefs are, rather than having someone try to change your beliefs directly, right? Before moving on to, before like weighing my extension, POI from opening.
Yes, how do you differentiate that people just randomly change their belief without exploring them? Because recognize changing or any sort of belief or whatsoever, as analyzed by my ideas, depends on positive changes. That means you explore yourself first.
Right. So people in general like probably want to explore what their beliefs are, given that they often work towards those beliefs their entire lives. But also, some beliefs are just not that hard to recognize, and I think you do have like a certain degree of control over recognizing what your beliefs are. Like, I can recognize that doing something like playing with my friends makes me happy, or I can like recognize what my gender or sexuality is. Whereas on their side, you're necessarily told to like change those beliefs. Um, like this motion is literally about altering your fundamental beliefs, not about discovering them. I can take one from CEO also. CG.
Please understand about the mechanism of facts and logic. If someone is super radical, they're going to face facts and logic and they're going to change their opinion. But if someone isn't, the debate still goes, but the changes, people are going to be more open-minded. Please engage with this mechanism.
Okay. Firstly, on your side of the house, people are unlikely to change on the basis of like facts either. They're likely to believe more things on like what society pressures them to believe, given that sure, like you do have the ability to like logically reason. However, there is a bunch of people telling you what beliefs you should adhere to. But also like there aren't factual claims about beliefs you can make. There aren't some beliefs that are inherently better than others. If I am self-interested, that is perfectly fine, I think, for me to be self-interested. And government can't just say that that is like an factually illegitimate belief to have because beliefs are inherently subjective. Moving on, then I'm just going to weigh off my claims. Firstly, I didn't hear like any rebuttal on the fact that people are likely to feel extremely bad when they can't change their beliefs. But secondly, most importantly, I proved to you why minorities who are the most vulnerable are less able to be coerced by societal institutions, and how you get more skepticism on things like the state when they don't have the ability to fundamentally change their beliefs. For all these reasons, vote for opposition.
I'd like to thank the BUET for a fantastic speech. Thank everyone for what was an excellent round of debate.